Good evening and welcome to the Monday, August 14th, 2023 Maplewood City Council Manager Workshop. City Manager Coleman, would you do the roll call for us, please?
Certainly, Mayor. Councilmember Villavicencio? Here. Councilmember Lee?
Present.
Councilmember Cave?
Here.
Councilmember Juniman? Here. Mayor Abrams?
I'm here as well, thank you. Council members, we need a motion to approve the agenda for tonight.
So move.
Second.
Moved by Lee, seconded by Cave, the motion to approve our agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. We have no unfinished business. We have new business tonight. We have the Metro Transit discussion of potential routing and station locations on White Bear Avenue and the North End District. And Ms. Parr, this is going to be your report for tonight. And I see we have some guests from Metro Transit. Thank you for being here. Danette, do you want to kick us off tonight for the workshop?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. As you likely recall, in March, the Purple Line Corridor Management Committee was given new direction to study the feasibility of a future BRT route to potentially extend along White Bear Avenue. Metro Transit staff has diligently been working in regards to getting public input and then looking at technical considerations that are necessary. Is your mic on? My mic isn't on. That was very bad of me. Sorry about that. I don't know how much of that was caught, but thank you to our person in the booth there. Basically, tonight, the Metro Transit staff would like to review public input that they've received, and even more pertinent, they would like to talk a little bit about the potential stations, sites, and how that could work and get staff as well as council's feedback in relation to if you think those are appropriate or other things that you'd like them to take into consideration as they move forward with the process. For the sake of time, I'm just going to turn it right over to Craig Lamoth and the rest of the Metro Transit staff to walk us through the PowerPoint. And I will direct your attention. In front of you, there is a PowerPoint presentation in writing and has a couple additional things that were not in the packet that was sent out. So we'll talk about those. Craig will mention those as we go. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. Good evening. Craig Lamoth, the Purple Line Project Manager. I've got some of my staff from the project team here tonight, and they'll do most of the speaking. We have three sections of our presentation tonight. What would your preference be, to take questions after each section or to hold them to the end? I know you have a very packed agenda tonight and time certain, finish by 7 o'clock. We've got about 30 minutes of content, we believe, to cover.
You know, I think it's always a good idea if council have a question during the presentation, if we take it at that time, because that helps with context. So I'll keep an eye. I've got lights up here, so if a council member wants to ask a question, I can see that, and then I'll just let you know.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So this evening, what we want to do is to give you an update on the route modification study phase 2, which is looking at White Bear Avenue and Maryland Avenue, what we were directed to look at back in April. And then where we're at in that process right now is proposed areas for potential station locations. So in order to do a lot of the technical work that's going to come, we need to kind of set where those stations most likely want to be. There would be some flexibility as we go through the technical analysis, may change our ideas and thinkings about those station locations, but we need something to start with, and we want to get your perspective on that before we take forward a staff recommendation to the Purple Line Corridor Management Committee on September 13th. And then we'll hear recent engagement feedback. We've held 3 community meetings. Several of you attended the last one we held last week, and we want to share with you what we've been hearing from the public about the proposed potential station locations. So Stephen Smith, our Deputy Project Manager, will handle number 1 tonight. Sarah Flum, our Design and Engineering Manager, will handle number 2. And then Liz Jones, our Community Engagement and Outreach Lead, will handle number 3. And then we'll be all available to answer any questions at the end that you may have that are bigger picture, and we'll talk a little bit about schedule going forward. So with that, I will turn it over to Stephen to talk a little bit about where we're at with the study.
Thank you. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and thanks, Craig. My name is Stephen Smith. I'm the Deputy Project Manager for Purple Line. Thank you for having us here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about route modification phase 2. This is a graphic that I think you all are familiar with. Craig presented this back in June. but it's always good to kind of go back over. Really, our efforts here for route modification phase 2 is focusing on what does it mean to be on a Maryland Avenue and White Bear Avenue. So that lighter purple line is really where a lot of our efforts are focused on. We study what it means to be on Bruce Vento Trail. That's that lighter gray. One of the things that we learned in the previous phase is that we could get to a Maplewood Transit Center, and that would be federally eligible. One of the things that we want to do with this lighter purple line now is, one, validate that we can get back to a Maplewood Transit Center. But from there, once we kind of do that work, we want to also understand what does it mean to go a little bit further. So eventually, the arrows that are kind of pointing outward, we will end up exploring what it means to get to a Vandus Heights, what does it mean to get to a Century College. But that probably wouldn't come until around spring of 2024. So a little bit later, and I have more schedule slide to kind of go through that in more detail. But one thing I always like to point out is the lighter purple line, we're starting from 0% there. We don't really have a lot of information. That's some of the things that we're doing today. We're building up to understand and study it more and more. So we're really starting from 0% related to the Maryland and White Bear Avenue corridor. So with that is demographics. So as we kind of embark on this new phase, well, what does it mean? Learning a little bit more about the demographics and who we would serve there. Really what this highlights is that this is indicative to what we see for our transit users today. So the statistics here look good. It also indicates to us that this is a strong corridor for a good transit investment too as well. One of the things that we're going to end up doing is taking the statistics that you see here today, end up comparing it back to a Bruce Vento Trail. But that's, again, later on around that spring 2024 timeframe. So you would end up seeing these statistics again. But again, as we kind of embark on understanding what it means to be on a White Bear Avenue and Maryland Avenue, we wanted to start off with understanding the demographics.
You know, I want to say just one point on this, something that I asked. I attended the August 9th meeting over here at the community center. I thought it was very well attended, great poster boards, a lot of good information. And I asked this very question about the demographics, looking at the difference using the White Bear Avenue corridor. It's 35,429. And I asked, what are the demographics using the Vento Trail? And they showed me the numbers, and it was a little over 19,000. So there is a significant, well, obviously the number is almost double in terms of demographics using the White Bear Area corridor. So that was important information in terms of looking at this, and I really appreciated that all of that information was available at that event. So thank you for that. But council members, I think that that's important to know.
Thank you. And yes, and we will end up bringing that comparison back. So everyone would be able to have a chance to see how that all compares with the demographics and all the other characteristics with the differences between the two corridors. So here's another graphic that Craig also introduced to you in June. The little difference here is that now we have some years on the side. This is what we call our evaluation steps. We call them the planks. And again, kind of starting off that reviewing the existing conditions and existing characteristics is really who are we serving, getting to know the corridor, going out, talking to the people. One of the things that we want to do is understand, well, what is the right-of-way? What are we hearing about safety along the corridor? How can we make it safer? What are we hearing about speeds related to the corridor? So there's a lot of information gathering that we're doing as part of that step. But one of the next steps that we're also embarking on is really understanding the options. You know, one of the things is that this is a 4-lane corridor. And one of the things that we're trying to do is try to understand what does it mean to have a dedicated transit lane in each direction and also have a general purpose lane in each direction. So as we talked about options, what does that mean? Is it side running? Is it center running? We're starting that process right now to really understand what that means. And then eventually, we're going to have a lot of different ideas in terms of configuration. But how do we get down to the most promising concepts, that 3 to 4 that's really has potential? From there, we would end up taking it down to one preferred alternative, bringing it back for a comparison to the Bruce Ventil Trail alignment, and then at the very end, that September timeframe, we will end up doing a recommended revised locally preferred alternative. So hopefully we get there around that September timeframe. But overall in 2023, you can see that we're really focusing a lot of our efforts on that 3 to 4, getting down to that 3 to 4, understanding stations and in our existing conditions. So that's going to be a lot of 2023, and then getting to that preferred concept in 2024. Some of the technical considerations that we need to make: this is a different corridor. There are businesses along the corridor. There are residents along the corridor. So really, when you start thinking about it, it's a little bit different. We need to think about what it means to repurpose the lane. Traffic and property access impacts is something that we have to consider too as well. Here today, we're going to talk to you a little bit about stations. As we get more into our technical analysis, we're going to want to understand where those stations belong. So we have done some engagement, and Sarah's going to go in a little bit more detail, and Liz, about station locations. But another thing that we want to consider is pedestrian facilities. So again, kind of what did we hear from the public? You know, some of the things that we have heard early on in our engagement is that it feels like a fast corridor. It feels difficult to cross. So some of the things we want to end up exploring is how can we improve some of those conditions as we're kind of embarking on changing and repurposing the roadway. And then lastly is our schedule slide. So this is new to you all. This is how we're kind of showing the overall schedule. At the very top, that's our corridor management committee meetings. Those are our policy and decision-making body. So at the very top, you can see that we're here in August, but what is our next step? It's to get to the station locations. We really want to be able to get to a point where we all have a general understanding where the stops kind of belong, so we can do more technical analysis. So then in October, we would end up bringing that 3 to 4, those 3 to 4 concepts that I was talking about, the most promising. We would end up bringing that in October, but from there, we would end up going to that green bar, which is our in-depth Tier 2 evaluation of those 3 to 4. That's where we would start bringing concepts in terms of our ridership, our cost updates, and our rating about those 3 to 4. So that would end up being shown around the March of 2024 timeframe, when we want to explore getting down to a single option. And then the Bruce Ventil Trail, we would also bring back in April to do a comparison between the two. And then I kind of mentioned earlier the northern endpoints. What does it mean to get to a Vandus Heights? What does it mean to get to a Century College? That would end up coming around the June timeframe. So we would introduce that information. And then ultimately, our goal is to get to a preferred, revised, locally preferred alternative. So that would end up coming in September. I think one thing I always like to point out is at the very bottom, when do we do engagement? So with stations today, you're going to hear a little bit about that, but everything that we're doing, we're trying to bring into the conversation as we go into a CMC. We want to make sure that we already talk with the public and have that feedback as we bring that into the conversation. So you can see stations is something that we are talking about here tonight, but then when we get to the 3 to 4, the White Bear Avenue concepts, that is something that we're going to be doing engagement around too as well before we get down to a single preferred alternative, so we can bring that information to the body. And then the same thing with the comparison between White Bear Avenue and Bruce Ventil Trail. So that is what I have for an update related to route modification phase 2. All right.
Good evening. I am Sarah Flum. I am the engineering and design manager for the Purple Line. So I am going to talk about what we are looking at for kind of just deciding where initially the station should be. We've been looking at existing land uses and some of the future development opportunities. We've been meeting with your staff, St. Paul staff, Ramsey County staff to kind of look and see what plans are for the future. There's a recommended station spacing for bus rapid transit, so we look at that. We've been trying to understand who will be serving And we are also looking at the existing local bus service because the existing Route 54 already serves the corridor and has some existing kind of ridership and statistics and things that we're looking at since we could potentially be in the same corridor. So our initial thoughts are essentially the same as the Route 54 stations. It would be 12 potential stations, one in each direction where each of those green ovals are. And then the dashed circles represent a quarter-mile buffer, which is typically like a 5-minute walk. So the Route 54 stations, you can see, are spaced pretty well. They're all within about a 5-minute walk of everyone along the corridor. So this is kind of another look at that. Oh, sure.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question around that piece. You mentioned earlier that you're looking at kind of the standard. Can you share with us what that standard is in terms of just BRT in general?
Sure. For full BRT, which is what we are trying to do, quarter mile is about the minimum, and a mile would be the maximum between stations. But I think on the Bruce Vento Trail, we only had 3 or 4 stations in that corridor, but that was really more to do with the land uses around there and finding the cross streets that aligned with better stations. Here there's quite a few more.
Thank you.
So this map turns it on its side from the previous map. So up in that top left corner is like Johnson and Maryland. And then, so that's where we begin looking at this new alignment. And then we go down to Maryland and White Bear Ave. We follow White Bear Ave to Beam. And then we go towards the Maplewood Mall Transit Center and St. John's. And as you can see, the green dot around St. John's is pretty large, and that is because when we're coming from this direction, it's a little bit tougher to figure out how we're going to route around St. John's. It was a little easier with the Bruce Vento Trail because we were going by St. John's anyways. But we're still looking at that and trying to figure that out. And we'll zoom in on the station locations later. So TOD is transit-oriented development. So these maps are some of the information that we have been looking at. We have been reviewing land use, property and building valuation data, and like I said, we met with staff from Maplewood, St. Paul, and Ramsey County to go over what their plans along this corridor are. Larpenteur was identified for redevelopment in both cities' comprehensive plans. Frost has some redevelopment opportunities on the Ramsey County campus, and there's potential for a connection to the development that's going in near the Bruce Vento Trail in Frost. And around County Road B, there are retail uses, Maplewood City campus, and there's a nearby parcel that was identified for mixed-use redevelopment. And continuing on then, at 11th and Jarvis, there's retail. There's an adjacent parcel that was previously explored for redevelopment. At County Road C, there's some property identified for redevelopment in the comp plan.
Can I just go back to a question
sure.
from your previous slide? In terms of the County Road B, this is the transit-oriented development. Retail uses, Maplewood City Campus, obviously County Road B. What nearby parcel are you referring to for mixed-use redevelopment?
I believe that. I'm not sure. Do you know?
I had
We'll have
that,
to check with our stationary planning team. They've done most of these, they've had most of these conversations.
if you could have someone get back to maybe Ms. Parr, that would be helpful to know what parcel it is that they're referring to.
Sure.
Thank you.
And then, so County Road C has been identified for redevelopment in the comp plan, 72 units of senior housing. And the Harmony Learning Center is in that vicinity. Beam from White Bear Avenue through St. John's, the north side is zoned to support transit-oriented development. The south side presents some redevelopment challenges. The takeaways is the station location, green circles, the beans that we have, we like to call them beans, are areas where the highest potential for redevelopment or existing development that supports transit exist. So then we were also looking at walkability in the vicinity of each station location. And we've created maps similar to this for every station location. This is a typical walk shed at a station. The red area are places where you could walk within 10 minutes to and from the stations. And then the green lines on these maps are sidewalks, existing sidewalks. Red lines are where there are no sidewalks. That shape of the red shaded area is determined by the street network. And gaps indicate longer block sizes. So at a corridor level, this is what our walkability maps look like. The one on the right is starting at Maryland and Johnson Parkway. And then the one on the left is the northern portion of the corridor, the Maplewood portion. And each of these station locations appears to have a pretty good walk shed. Right now, we can probably do things with the project to make it better, like putting in sidewalks or different things like that. But this is one of the things that's important to see who would be able to walk to the stations from the existing residences and businesses. So zooming in on the station locations, the first one, after we turn off of the trail corridor behind the Cub Foods on Maryland, first one would be at Clarence Street. And this Hazelwood and the next station would all be potentially shared stations between Purple Line and the future H-Line arterial BRT project. So when we look at these station locations, we're really looking at them for 2 bus rapid transit lines on Maryland. Clarence, right now, would be really close to that Cub Foods. Right now, that's one of the busiest stations in the East Metro. The next station is Hazelwood. There is public housing near that station, and a few businesses. Fire station, I think, or there's the National Guard training. And then the White Bear Ave in Maryland, the station location that we're studying there is a little bit bigger because of trying to share with the H-Line. The H-Line will be turning south on White Bear Avenue, and we will be turning north, so we're looking in that general vicinity for a good location where we could share a station. The next station would be at Arlington, which St. Paul considers Arlington to be kind of the hub of that neighborhood there. Larpenteur is the border, of course, between St. Paul and Maplewood, and a pretty natural location for a station. And then moving further along, Frost would be the next potential one with Aldrich Arena and the Catholic Charities and Ramsey County Fair sites.
We have a question from Councilmember Cave.
Hi. Just, like you mentioned before, these proposed stations are already they're bus stops right now. Now, what do you look at changing them into?
So bus rapid transit station platforms are a little bit bigger. We have to have a higher level curb for boarding so that we don't necessarily have to deploy a ramp for strollers or wheelchairs. It's supposed to be, you know, the bus pulls up, opens the doors, and you can roll or walk right on. So that takes a little bit of space to ramp up to that level. There's a little bit better shelters. Some that are out there right now don't have shelters at all. These would have shelters that have heat. And we do off-board fare collection, so there would have to be machines at the station that are a little bit protected from the elements for buying tickets for riding.
Okay.
So, I mean, and there's more opportunity for seating, and did I mention that we heat the shelters for bus rapid transit and things, so it's kind of a higher amenity station.
So it's kind of like a major overhaul, not something minor. And are all these locations that you're looking at proposed look like they can do this major overhaul where they're at right now?
Well, our beams are covering a few blocks, so it might not be at the major street, but we'll fit them in where we can. We don't want to, you know, take any businesses if we can help it or impact too much how they operate. So, so that might mean shifting a little bit.
Okay. Thank you.
County Road B would be the next station location, close by, with the YMCA and municipal buildings. 11th and Jarvis. After Highway 36 would be the next location with the Hy-Vee and a bunch of businesses there. The next proposed station location would be County Road C, the Minnesota Women's Care, Harmony Learning Center, and then that Maplewood Professional Building is kind of right on the border between the station area for County Road C and Beam. There is an existing station right now at Beam and White Bear Ave, and it's very close to Maplewood Mall Transit Center, but there's a lot of boardings there for some of the other local routes, so so that might be an important location to kind of make connections.
You know, let me just ask a question. In terms of the question that I asked about development around County Road B, can you please check and see, I think what you may be referring to is some development that is happening near County Road C.
Oh, okay.
From this particular location. Maybe, Ms. Parr, you can follow up on that, just so that we get the correct information.
Yeah.
Because we're aware of some development here, but not around County Road B.
Okay.
Thanks.
And then the last two stations on Beam are the Maplewood Mall Transit Center, and that is a generous-sized station area location, just because how we route to St. John's Boulevard kind of impacts where we're going to stop at the Maplewood Mall Transit Center. That is kind of a natural place for the end of the line and for us to lay over. because typically we need somewhere for the drivers to stop and use restrooms and everything. And the transit center already has all of that. But we are committed to trying to serve St. John's as well. So, so where exactly we stop in the Maplewood Mall Transit Center and where exactly we stop on St. John's are still, we're still trying to figure that out.
Okay, thank you.
And so these are all the locations that we're going to be studying. We're going to continue with these. You know, as we look into them more and as we get ridership data and cost data, you know, we may have to make some changes. But these are the stations that we think are, or the locations we think are good for stations. Just looking at preliminarily.
Thank you. We have one question.
Oh, sure.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned that the Clarence one over by on the St. Paul side is the busiest station in the East Metro area. Can I also assume then that you also have data for all of the other stops?
Yes.
Okay, is that something that can be provided to us as information so we understand kind of what that demographic, the ridership looks like?
Yeah, it's all, yeah. I mean, we've pulled it from Metro Transit's website, so I think we can share that.
Okay, thank you.
And we also have ridership data for the 64 and the 80, because they run through most of that corridor too. So we're looking at all of that.
Thank you.
And then Liz wants to talk about the engagement that we've been doing and will be doing.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having us here today. Liz Jones. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Lead for the Purple Line Project. Let me not forget I have this here. Just want to talk a little bit today about the engagement that we've been doing around station locations so far and what we've been hearing. We are still collecting a lot of feedback from folks. We'll be through the rest of the year, but particularly through the end of this month, kind of on these preliminary station locations. So I'll get to this in a minute, but we've been doing a lot of business canvassing. So canvassing all the businesses along Maryland and White Bear Avenues, as well as some community meetings regarding these preliminary stations are where we've been really focusing our time over these last couple months. Also continuing to do pop-up events and community spaces. So there's a couple listed on this slide as well. But we did have our main community events where we had a location in St. Paul at the Hayden Heights Library, right down the street here at the YMCA Community Center last week, and then we held a virtual meeting as well. And thanks to all the council members who came out last week. We had a really great turnout in Maplewood here. So these are really the questions that we've been focusing on for the focus conversation on these station locations from the public. So really wanting to understand, we've been sharing the message that we are looking at these locations that coincide with current Route 54 stops, but not knowing for sure if we will be able to have all of these stations that are listed here. So wanting to know which locations folks think would be a priority, kind of why they think certain locations would be a priority, and what would be more important. Would it be a shorter walk to and from stations? So that would be more stations, which would also be a longer travel time, or do folks prefer a faster trip? So that would be a longer walk to stations, and that would be fewer stations as well. Also just wanting to know if folks have thoughts on other areas that we should consider. So these next two slides are the same, just showing the different imagery of the map. So this one overlays some of the different land uses to help folks in responding. And we did have these questions up as well with kind of the detailed role plot that we've had at all of these events, and then broken down in a similar manner to help folks be able to see what we're talking about in asking these questions. This is a picture from our first community meeting. So some of the high-level feedback that we've received so far from folks, a lot of interest in a station at the Maplewood Transit Center, as well as Larpenteur Avenue, so those have been kind of the favorites so far. Also stations at that White Bear, Maryland corner, 11th and Jarvis, and then Clarence and Arlington as well have risen to the top from what we've heard so far. And again, we're still collecting this feedback, so after this effort, we'll also be reporting back with kind of our more comprehensive big picture feedback on everything. Some factors that folks listed as what's important to them would be proximity to residential and business areas, shopping centers, and vital community services, making sure that stations are accessible for bicyclists and pedestrians, connectivity to other transit systems, other bike trails and roadways for that community connection, and serving transit-dependent populations. So far, we've had a lot of interest in faster service over a number of stations. A few comments that we've heard on other areas, but we've generally heard that these locations look pretty good to folks. Still hearing a lot of interest to further route to Century College, so that is still coming up a lot from folks. And had a couple comments about wanting to serve the Highway 61 area, and then making sure we are serving the residential housing around Iowa Avenue. This feedback is mostly from our first couple community meetings. Like I said, we're still compiling our data, but we're seeing pretty consistent themes across the board so far. So safety and security in the area, wanting to have minimal impacts on the character. So there's definitely been a lot of questions on, what does this actually mean in terms of impacts and what's this going to look like in layout? I know, like Councilmember Cave, you asked that. There's a lot that we still don't know yet. So really wanting folks to let folks know that we will have that information coming up to them. There will be more opportunities for them to get involved. But like Stephen mentioned earlier, we are kind of starting from scratch in this corridor. But wanting to get feedback that will kind of help us determine these locations. So again, minimizing impacts, wanting to know, there's a lot of folks who are new to learning about the project. So really understanding BRT and what our stations look like, that information as well. Still a lot of questions about removing lanes on Wiper Avenue and what does that mean? What does that look like? Some folks think it sounds great. Some folks do not think it sounds so great. And then we still also have some preference for Bruce Fonto trail routing. So we've been hearing a lot of feedback on that as well, but overwhelming support for this corridor that we're looking at here.
I attended the August 9th meeting over here at our community center. And one thing that I did appreciate is the focus on safety, because when we had our engagement process this last winter and early spring, one of the things that was a very big issue was safety and security using Metro Transit. And we've all seen the news articles and we've seen the television reports about safety, and there's a big concern about it. So I was very pleased to see that you had, I think it was at least 3 poster boards on safety and what efforts you're taking in terms of safety at the different stations. I thought you did a really good job of that, so I appreciated that. I thought that was very responsive, because that will continue to be an issue that we are going to want to make sure that we pay attention to. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Absolutely. And I'll just add that as part of Metro Transit Safety and Security Action Plan, there's frequent updates to that, so we'll continue to provide updates on that data and progress on the activities as we have
Good,
that as
thank
well.
you.
This right here is some of the geographic feedback that we've been receiving through our interactive map. And so so all these bubbles here are actual comments. Folks can go in and provide comments or even ask questions of us through this platform, as well as we do have embedded questionnaires related to the stations as well. Some things that we've been hearing, we kind of have broken out into ideas and concerns. Some of these are just kind of general comments, but folks like that this is close proximity to a lot of amenities, support that this is reducing environmental impacts. There was a couple comments that folks did want an expansion of Wiper Avenue, some more lanes on Wiper Avenue. Concerns about traffic, concerns about frequency of stops, again, more interest in fewer stops. And just some ideas, folks definitely want us to serve St. John's, and others wanting to know more about ridership and demand of some of the land uses around the station locations. Some business feedback that we've heard. So we did canvass over 170 businesses, probably closer to 200 as we got out throughout the whole corridor. And that was less focusing on the station locations themselves, because that was really before we had this data, but more so wanting to connect with the businesses, let them know that who we are, that we are looking at this corridor, wanting to understand who they are, how they operate, what their needs are for travel and transportation, any existing concerns for access or safety that they might have currently that we can help share with the team and kind of feed into developing these station locations and concepts. So it was really great to get out there. Definitely a lot of folks who are not familiar with the project. So really a lot of awareness building and connections and relationship building as well. A lot of mix of support and opposition and indifference from the various businesses. As you all know, there's many different types of businesses along this whole corridor. So definitely had a mixture of response, but definitely still a lot of support for access and hearing a lot of relay for needs for transit access from particularly a lot of retail, that their customers and some employees use transit a lot as well. Definitely want to improve the access, like I mentioned, for employees and customers. Again, concerns and questions about what this will actually look like in terms of business access or traffic and safety concerns. Also, folks, this kind of the similar safety category of existing kind of concerns for safety and really what feels like not such a pedestrian-friendly area today, and how we would address that and make that better and make sure that the businesses are still accessible to both transit users and then folks who use personal vehicles as well. This slide here, just some of our upcoming events. Like I mentioned, we are continuing to do community events, so we have been attending all of the Maplewood Celebrate Summer events in the various parks. So those have been really great to connect with folks. We'll be chatting with the White Bear Avenue Business Association tomorrow. We have met with Friends of the Parks already, and actually this meeting is being moved to October, but we'll continue to chat with folks involved with that group. And looking forward to starting to get into the fall time at the Touch a Truck event as well. We are also in the process of scheduling some pop-ups over the next few weeks here. So trying to get into Maplewood Mall, visiting Hayden Heights Library again. There's some activities and events there, which is a great way to connect with folks. Doing more of our bus stop canvassing, which we have done already, but meeting more folks at the bus stops and on the local routes that serve the transit customers in this area. Visiting Best Church. And then we also did revisit some of the BIPOC-owned businesses along Maryland and White Bear Avenues, just to revisit them from our initial canvassing and make sure that we were connecting with as many folks as possible. Also sharing our ways, wanting to really encourage folks to continue to follow along with us and provide their feedback as we do continue this effort and have more information to share. So the interactive feedback map has been really great, and this actually will continue throughout the life of the project. So as the project updates and changes, this will be a staple and a great tool for folks to stay connected with us in a more interactive way as well. We still have our business inventory survey open that we've been sharing out for folks who weren't maybe able to complete it or talk to us in person. Still attending community events and presentations and planning for some walking and rolling tours actually outside on site in the corridor this fall. And that's all I have.
Thank you, and I see no lights up here. No other questions, it looks like.
All right.
Oh, wait.
Just a quick,
Councilmember Lee, you had a question.
just a quick comment, actually. I appreciate all of the translation that you guys have done. That was really helpful for the community. So I took one of each and just kind of reviewed them among one, and you guys did a really good job with it. So I just want to give you a prop for that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We look forward to the next update.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council members, moving on our agenda, this I know is a very packed workshop, but we are moving on to our city council budget, which, you know, as far as council members are concerned, our budget is a kind of a perpetual discussion that we have. I know that we we've had some pretty high-level discussions already, and we will be continuing to have additional discussions. But this is a pretty comprehensive presentation that we have tonight, and it is going to be provided by Mr. Rube, our Finance Director. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight, we are looking at our first round of budget CIP overview. With this process, the city needs to submit a proposed tax levy to the county by October 2nd, and then we go through all of our other workshops and planning, and then we have to adopt it by December 28th, to the county. With the preliminary levy, we set it at the maximum that we would want to go. We can always go down. We cannot go up after we submit that preliminary levy to the county. This year, the estimated levy would be about $27,769,957. Let's get right into the presentation. Again, tonight we are looking at the preliminary levy and an overview of the CIP. We'll discuss the strategies, goals, and challenges of this budget cycle, and then our timeline, and then budget policies. As we go through the budget process, we do keep in mind the strategic priorities set forth by the council and the city. So we look at each category, we make sure that we're falling in place with each of these. On this next slide, we look at the preliminary property tax levy for 2024. Currently, you can see on the graph, or the spreadsheet, that the 23 adopted levy is just under 26 million, and the preliminary is $27,769,957, which is a 7% increase. At the bottom of this slide, I have scenarios if we did a 6%, 7%, 8%. Again, we're right in the middle there at 7% currently. This next slide shows the tax levy history that we've had with the city over the past 11 years, I guess including 2024. With the 7%, the average levy increase is 3.8%, keeping in mind that 2 of those years we did do a 0% levy increase. I do have information from 9 surrounding cities. The average levy that they're looking at is about 8.5% at this point. One of them is as high as 16%. On this next slide, we can look at the changes for the levy for this upcoming year. So at the bottom, you see the $1.8 million. Of that, $1.3 million, almost $1.4 million, covers the payroll increases for all employees. And then it breaks down other items such as contractual services. A lot of that has to do with things that are out of our control when it comes to some of our vendors, utilities for heating and cooling. And then our staff did go through and find other areas to minimize or to decrease their supplies and commodities if possible. With this, it is $1.8 million increase, which is very significant. However, if we did not close our DMV, we'd be looking at another potential $200,000 to $300,000 loss, which equates to between another 0.75 to 1.15% levy increase. So this is helping us keep that levy down as well. This next slide shows the payroll increases, as I mentioned in the slide before. With the elections, we only budget that on election years. So that is unfortunately something that we have to put in that was not in the budget from prior years, from this current year, 2023. And then as you can see, over 70% of the payroll increases are accounted for by both police and fire, which just goes to show how committed the council is to supporting those 2 departments and the public safety of our residents and community. This next slide shows the staffing changes within the city. As you can see, it did decrease. This next one, we're looking at the 2024 budget goals and challenges. So we are currently looking at a 7% overall increase. 5.3% of that increase is due to payroll. And then we have the capital increases, which includes radios and public safety equipment. We never know what we're going to get for tax petitions. It can skyrocket at any time. And then another challenge that we have is the ambulance fund, as you're all aware. As of right now, looking at the budget, there's quite a bit of a shortfall plan for 2024 to about $1.2 million. And as our auditor this spring pointed out, that with Medicare and Medicaid, there's only a cap on what we can receive for reimbursement for ambulance services. So anything other than that, we have to write off, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And then also when it comes to regular collection of fees for ambulance services, we have issues collecting on them. We do have a company that does a fantastic job doing that, but there are just people that don't have the capability to make those payments. We do put them in through revenue recapture, so we are able to capture some of that. So we are doing multiple things to make sure that we're capturing as much revenue for the EMS fund.
No, Joe, can I just add here? I know Kathleen and I were on the audit committee, and the auditor brought this to her attention this spring. I think we've already talked about it here. I certainly have talked with other mayors who are also experiencing this exact same problem with the ambulance fund. And I guess in my mind, I kind of equated a little bit with what we experienced with the DMV, that we weren't getting sufficient reimbursements from the state and federal government to actually pay for the cost of providing the service. Now, the difference is with the DMV, that was not one of our core functions, but and so we made that very challenging decision to close the DMV. But here we have the ambulance fund, and because of Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements, they aren't paying for it, but we don't have that same ability to say we're not going to provide ambulance services. So we're in a position where we've got to treat this differently, and we have to take this seriously, because the auditor explained to Councilmember Juniman and I that within 3 years, if we do not do something each one of these years, that it will be insolvent within 3 years. And so we've got to figure out a way in order to pay that. And hopefully maybe what we might also be able to do is to approach our federal legislators in terms of the federal reimbursement for Medicare and Medicaid, because this is killing not only us, but it's impacting other cities as well. Everyone is struggling with it and trying to figure out what do we do, because this is really important. We have to provide ambulance services for our residents, but how are we going to pay for this when we're not getting enough back from reimbursements? It's a challenge for us council members, but it's something that I'm going to keep on my radar, because the auditor was very clear with us that within 3 years, this fund is going to be in some real trouble. So it's one of our missions, I think, at least it's one of mine, to figure out how we can do something each one of these 3 years. And then also figure out how can we approach our federal legislators, our Congress representatives, so that we can maybe do something so that the ambulance fund is not in such dire straits. So thank you for that, Joe.
Yes, thank you. I was going to add to that back this spring when our auditor was out here talking about the ambulance fund. He did give us a few options that we can consider, including a tax levy specifically for the EMS fund, transfers from other environmental funds, and then moving this fund out of the enterprise funds into the general fund. And Chief Mondor has been in contact with several other fire chiefs to ask them how they're operating their departments. Quite a few of them are working at their departments under the general fund, and if they're not, they're looking to move it to the general fund because of the hurdles that they have to go through with trying to match the revenue and the expenditures. So those are a few options that we can look at, and like I said, Chief Mondor is looking into good options for us as well.
We'll have more discussions on that.
And then
Thank you.
other concerns on with the ambulance fund would be on top of the $1.2 million is their CIP needs for ambulance and power cots. That is for next year, as well as future firefighters. So they are going out for that grant. However, we will have to pay for them in the future. 3 firefighters at this rate, right now in 2024, would cost about $468,000 with benefits. That equals about 1.8% levy. So we need to come up with a plan in order to prepare for that. Whether or not we do get this grant, if we get it, that's great. We still need a plan for it in the, once the grant is over with.
City Manager Coleman.
Mayor and members of the council, just to add on to Joe's comments about the future fire EMT staff that we've talked about, I think that by the time we get to the September meeting, we're going to have to make a decision whether we include that levy for those firefighter EMTs in case we don't get the grant. So I just want you to have that on the horizon, because that's going to come up by, when we get to September, we're going to have to make a call on that. We won't find out about the grant till after the levy's set.
And that's something that we've already, I think, committed to in principle as a council. And that was a unanimous agreement that we need to be able to make sure that our firefighters and EMTs, that we've got sufficient staff moving forward with the anticipated numbers of calls. Councilmember Cave.
I was just going to ask if that was in line with kind of like our mental health person that we had. At first, we had a grant for them, and they did such a fabulous job, but grants only last so long, and then to keep them, we had to make a decision to put them on the payroll.
Exactly,
So-
and I actually, Finance Director Rube and Mayor and I talked about that this morning, and that's exactly what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to plan for that, because that's exactly what happens.
Yeah.
And the grant is a 3-year grant, so that would take us to 2027, but at that point, they're all on us.
Then they're all on the payroll for
Yeah.
us, yeah.
And at that point, if we have 12 new firefighter paramedics, it's a huge increase if we don't plan for it in advance. Thank you. Some of the two other things I wanted to point out with the 2023, the city should receive a public safety aid from the state for about $1.8 million. This can be used from a wide variety, for a wide variety of purposes, including personnel and equipment. We don't want to use something like these funds for operation because they do go away. However, if we need to use part of it to supplement for a year, we could do that. And it can be used for police, fire, and EMS. Also, in 2024, we will receive an additional $726,000 in LGA. Currently, we're getting just under $1.35 million, so it's a significant increase. Once again, that is a one-time increase, not going to happen going forward. Generally, with those funds, with the LGA, we put them to the SRF fund to help offset the special assessments, so we're not issuing debt for those. We can, we have the mayor, city manager, and I, we're looking at different options with that as well. We can also increase the SRF contribution for 2024, but use some of the rest of it towards the EMS fund to help get that closer to balancing a balanced budget. And then staff will be continuing to look at how to allocate the public safety aid and the LGA, just to make sure that we are using it in the best ways. This next slide is the 2024 to 2028 capital improvement plan. The total of all these projects for those 5 years is just under $63 million, so quite a bit being spent there. Of that, just over $46 million is dedicated to streets for that 5-year period. These next two slides go through the 2024 CIP plans, from equipment, park projects, street projects. Next slide for EMS, fire, and police. You can see what all those are. That comes out to the $16,491,000. Slide, we have some options for decreasing the levy. The city could look at removing the levy for the EDA. That's about $150,000. Right now, the EDA is sitting at about $600,000. 2023's levy includes $150,000, so by the end of 2023, we should have approximately $750,000 in that fund. We could cut it all together, or we could reallocate it to other projects like EAB, or areas that the council wishes to look into. Other options would be to reduce the levy for the building fund, as well as reduce the levy for public safety capital. We do have those grants. However, one of the CIP items is a new fire engine that was initially at, was it $875,000? It is now estimated to be about $1.1 million. So it has had a significant increase. And then also on here, we just note that $260,000 is approximately 1% of the levy. This next slide is our budget CIP timeline. So tonight we have our first workshop, on the 28th we'll have our second, and then as I mentioned, we're gonna have the preliminary levy adoption on September 11th, and then that way we can have that filed with the county by the end of the month. For our budget process, our department heads review all of their their department's budgets line by line. They start off with the zero base, anticipating that they can't do a whole lot of an increase outside of the factors of personnel costs. We have contracts in place for that. And then we take a look at the CIP and budget, what everybody's requests are. Moving on from there, we do an internal review between the city manager, the department heads, finance director, and figure out what our priorities are exactly. And then the city manager will have her recommendations, and then we'll have future workshops to continue coming up with our final budget. This next slide just kind of shows that there's dozens of staff involved. It's all department heads. Quite a few staff throughout the city are involved in this process. So hundreds of hours, thousands of account codes. If you'd like to see it, I'd love to show it to you sometime. But there are thousands of account codes, and then obviously millions of dollars that are involved with this process. This slide shows us the fund structure that we have with the city for all of our budgetary funds, our governmental funds that are in that orange color, and then the enterprise funds where you'll see the ambulance fund as the first one there. So how do we plan for the future? We do a long-term financial management planning. The different departments take a look at what their needs might be in the next 10 years. We only include 5 years in the CIP here, but we do look out even past that to make sure that we're doing good projections. Oops. This last slide, tonight we are not looking for necessarily there's no specific action required. We are looking for council to kind of point the staff in the direction they want to see us go with the levy, and then to have them affirm the 2024 CIP projects. And then if there's any other policy decisions that need to be discussed at this time. And if you want to go into a deeper dive into any of this, we'd be happy to do that offline and show you the ins and the outs of the budget process.
Thank you, Joe. For council members, this is a huge endeavor that we have to do every single year. I think this is my 9th year of doing the budget, and I have to say each year is different because there is a different economic horizon that we're looking at. We're looking at different needs, different circumstances, trying to figure out how to balance all of this and do it as good stewards of our taxpayers' money. And so I want to thank you for putting all of this together. It's certainly, I appreciate that slide. This is hundreds and hundreds of hours of staff time and trying to be fiscally responsible and also trying to look forward as to not only the needs that we have today, but the needs that we're going to have into the future so that we can position ourselves. And it really requires, I think, the council to be nimble and creative on this, but also very, very responsible. So I know we've got some lights on. Let's start with Councilmember Cave and then Councilmember Villavicencio.
Hi, thanks, Joe. Good report. I have a question about if you can just explain to the people that are watching a little bit. We talked about the public safety, about $1 million in payroll increase next year. Now, you also mentioned that we have a $1.8 million in public safety aid. Can you explain what the aid is? It's not like, free money given and we're sitting on this pot of 1.8 waiting to spend it, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So it is an allocation that's coming from the state, and they do, it has been designated by the state that it has to be used for public safety. It can be used for a wide variety of purposes, but it can be used for personnel, it can be used for equipment. Again, the biggest complexity with it is a one-time thing. So we can look at it, and it's great to have $1.8 million come in, but when you're looking at a $1.1 million fire engine, it doesn't go very far.
Mm-hmm.
And since it is a one-time thing, we can't continue to anticipate that we will have that in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Some of the things that I talked with Joe, as he said, Melinda and Joe and I met this morning, is looking at possibly using some of that 1.8 million for the ambulance fund, because that would be a permissible use of some of that. And we have to recognize that this is one-time money. There's no guarantee that we will ever get something like this again. And so putting that into anything new certainly would not be very prudent for us, because that's just not what you do with one-time money. And so, but we talked about different kinds of things that we could do with that to meet our needs, because the needs are great. So, thank you. Councilmember Villavicencio.
Thank you. Thank you for your continued work on this. I remember in past years we've taught, or you've showed us the comparative cities and where they're at. I was wondering, I don't know if you have that today, but could we get that maybe the next time we see you?
Yes, so I do have information from 9 different cities. I have them all listed here if you'd like. I did not include it in the slide.
Do you want to just run through some of those, because I had that same question today?
Yes. The cities that are included in that are Arden Hills, Little Canada, Mounds View, New Brighton, North St. Paul, Spring Lake Park, St. Anthony, Venice Heights, and White Bear Township. Those are the only ones that have responded to the survey that was sent out. And that was just as of end of last week, but we're anxious to find out some of the other cities in the surrounding areas comparable in size to us, what their levies will be.
Can you tell them some of the percentage increases that they're discussing or considering at this point, because it is a range?
Sure. I don't have the exact numbers here. I have them on my computer. But
Estimates.
I want to say the lowest was about 3.5%, but the highest was 16.68%. 2 of them were double digits. The majority of them seem to be in that 8 to 9% range.
I think it would be a good idea if we can have that information for the next meeting,
Yes.
because then, everyone is going through this, that they've got the same deadlines that we have to meet, and so we'll be able to look more at that as to what their projections are. City Manager Coleman.
I would just add to that it's a little early in the process too, and most cities are just starting like we are about looking into this, so we'll get more data as we go through this. I'd also say with regard to the public safety money that the legislature gave cities this year, there's a lot of handouts, as you can imagine. There's a lot of ideas about how to spend that money. And so it will be our job collectively to figure out how do we maximize those dollars that gets the police department and the fire department the things that they need, but also is there making sure we're using that money to the best of our ability to leverage what we can when we have that one-time money. So we have some work ahead of us, but I think collectively we'll come up with some good ideas.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Joe? Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm actually just, in your research and as you're gathering information, we have a big investment in our fire and police department here. I'd like to understand a little bit more what other cities are investing in, to just kind of see if there are any gaps or anything like that. So, the 16% one, is there investment going into fire and police? Was it going to a new building? So just to kind of give us an idea of what direction we're going in.
City Manager Coleman has a response.
I'll take a stab at it. Maybe Joe can add. Today when we had the conversation, we recognized that 70% of payroll goes to public safety. So that's a pretty big number. I would assume that cities that have departments of our size would see the same kinds of things, but also consider that we did a pay plan implementation that will cost us dearly, but that's how we're retaining our employees. We wouldn't be able to retain the employees we have if we hadn't done that. But we can certainly get you more information on that.
And just a follow-up question to that, can that one-time money be used for buildings?
The public safety aid, my understanding is they can't be used for buildings.
So
But
it can't
I'd
be
have
used for buildings?
That's my understanding of it. I'd have to take more.
I
more of a
recall
deeper
seeing
dive into
something
it.
that we all get those league updates, and I believe that was in there too. Yeah, I don't think you can either. It's one-time money, and so I remember seeing something about that too, but maybe that's something that we can get more information on.
Yes.
Because there are limitations as what cities can actually use that for, so.
No, I just wanted to comment too, that people don't realize too that we have our police and fire in Maplewood, and a lot of people don't have A lot of cities don't have ambulance anymore. They hire out. So by having the fire department and the ambulance service in here, it costs us more money to do that than it does other people too. So when you look at the other cities, not everybody has an ambulance anymore. Yes. Yeah, we're one of the last to really.
Did you have another
Just
question?
a quick comment, Mayor.
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to quickly comment on the payroll increase and how I love the fact last year how you guys did the payroll study, and that's the best investment, is investing in our own people, our team here in the city of Maplewood. So this for me is just we talk about equity. This is all part of that process. So I'm very proud of what we are doing here in the city of Maplewood. So.
No other questions? Anything else that we need to know, Joe?
Not at this time. We are waiting on more information from the county so we can see exactly how it's going to impact our residents, but this is what I have for now.
Okay, I just want to remind everyone that we will be having another budget discussion at our next council meeting on August 28th, and we will also be having a listening session concerning our budget as well. So we'll be talking about the budget at our workshop at our next meeting, and then at 6:30 we are going to have a listening session so that we can hear from our residents who want to come and share with us what they think the priorities should be, because we do have to prioritize. It would be really nice if we had an open checkbook and we had endless funds, but unfortunately, those are wishes and dreams, and that's not the reality of where we are. And as electeds, we are charged with being responsible stewards, and so I'm very glad that we're going to be taking input from people about what our priorities should be. So I look forward to that discussion and hearing more from our residents next week, or at our next council meeting. So thank you, Mr. Rube. We really appreciate all of your help and all your work on this. So thank you.
Thank you.
And council members, that is our agenda for our workshop. We got it in time, and so we've got a little bit of a break. So with that, I will adjourn the workshop, and we'll reconvene at 7 o'clock for our council meeting.